Well, let's discuss these latest developments now with Sahar Khamis, who's a senior non-resident fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, and she's joining us from Washington, D.C. Sahar, very good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. So we have here the Israeli army admitting that its soldiers broke the rules of engagement, and the account of how the captives died has raised questions about the conduct of Israeli ground troops and also anger on the streets today, as we see in Tel Aviv. But of course, Palestinians will tell you that on several occasions, they've reported that Israeli soldiers opened fire as civilians tried to flee to safety. So what do you think is the fallout from this likely to be?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think that it does have a lot of important indications and implications. I think it clearly shows that the tactics and strategies that have been used by the Israeli army in the Gaza Strip has been, to say the least, indiscriminate when it comes to targeting certain targets. You know, it's not been targeting, for example, quote unquote, Hamas fighters, which is what the Israeli army has always claimed to be doing, like, oh, we are just going after Hamas. This is our target. This is our goal. We know that more than 18,000 civilians have been killed in the Gaza Strip, many of whom have been children, elderly people, women, and these are just innocent civilians. They have nothing to do with Hamas. They're not soldiers. They're not involved in this fighting in any way, shape, or form. So this very interesting and important incident really shows that there has been some kind of failure on the part of the Israeli army to protect human life. And in that particular case, of course, we saw these, three people shirtless and raising white flags. One of them was screaming in Hebrew. And despite that, they were still shot in what the Israeli army described to be, a miss tactic or some kind of unfortunate incident. But it really signals a much wider, much bigger issue and much bigger problem, because we know that, for example, the Palestinian civilians were ordered to flee or to leave North Gaza and to go to the south. Even after relocating to the south, many of them still became targets of Israeli fire. Many of them were shot, many of them were killed, many of them were injured, and in some cases even in hospitals or in refugee centers and other places where they're not supposed to be targeted.
But as you say, it's a much bigger issue, but that it would seem is only coming to light now for the Israeli public opinion, because they're not used to seeing their own, I guess, killed by their military. And we're seeing now protests over the killings in Tel Aviv and calls for the Israeli government to do more to bring the captives home from Gaza. Do you think this incident, will force the government to perhaps work now towards a ceasefire that would allow for more hostages to be freed?
Well, that is definitely the hope, because the Israeli public opinion does matter in this particular equation. And when we see Israeli families, Israeli civilians going out and protesting and demonstrating and being very angry at their government and saying, this is wrong, this is not supposed to be happening, you should do something about it. The hope is, of course, most ideally, that it will bring a quicker complete ceasefire in this tragic ongoing conflict. But there is also even another hope, which can be more doable and more immediate, which is returning back again to the Qatar-mediated negotiations in order to free the captives. There are still more than 130 captives with Hamas, some of whom are soldiers, some of whom are civilians. The Qatar-mediated negotiations have been successful in the past to release some hostages. We saw that. And then we saw, unfortunately, the return of the fighting once again. It is the hope that with this kind of incident, the Israeli public is now aware this is not just inflicting harm and damage on the Palestinians, it is also inflicting harm and damage on the Israelis as well. So the hope is for the Israeli public opinion to bring or to put some pressure on the government to be back again on the negotiation table to kind of have some kind of mediated release of the remaining hostages and hopefully even have a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, and there are reports that negotiations are resuming, led by Qatar, to get a new truce and get more captives released from Gaza. Sahar Khamis, thank you very much for talking to us. We'll, of course, be talking to you throughout the evening here on Al Jazeera. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.